Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Tuesday, April 7th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, as agencies take on new guidance and new expectations, accountability is being reshaped across the government. OMB's latest IT memo echoes years of policy, but signals some important shifts agencies can't ignore. Plus, the Cost Accounting Standards Board is carrying out a congressional mandate with comments now open. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. The Trump administration is once again pursuing deep spending cuts for federal civilian agencies as part of its budget request for next year. Overall, it's proposing a 10% cut to non-defense discretionary spending. The White House is also doubling down on reorganization plans that Congress ignored in a comprehensive spending plan for this year. Federal News Network's Jory Heckman is here with more detail. Jory, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Terry. Great to be here.
Give us the big picture. What are the non-defense cuts that are being proposed in this president's budget?
Right. So overall, this is a pretty sizable cut to federal civilian spending here. To put it one way, the budget proposal would cut discretionary spending at 10 of the cabinet level agencies and increase budgets for the remaining 5. It's not always where you think it would be. For example, the Department of Homeland Security would actually get a year-over-year decrease in fiscal 2027 compared to current levels. But let's also keep in mind that there's multiple buckets of money at work here because, of course, DHS is also has on tap the vast sums of money available to them in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So that's one other place to look at there. And they're, of course, flush with money there. But by and large, there's also a real doubling down from the administration on some reorganization proposals that didn't get off the ground in the last budget cycle, and they are pursuing them once again.
Well, Congress last year really didn't take on the cuts that were proposed by the Trump administration in its first budget. Those cuts were much smaller. How did these proposed cuts compare?
Overall, fairly, obviously some places are different than others. There are some more modest budget cuts at some places compared to last year. I think a notable example is the Education Department. They would have gotten huge double-digit, really sizable budget cuts that was being proposed during the last budget cycle, reflecting the administration's plans to largely dismantle the Education Department. What's notable here is that the overall goal is still the same. The department still wants to close the Education Department, but they actually are only getting a roughly 3% budget cut in this proposal. And that reflects the fact that the department will remain for the foreseeable future, but a lot of its work is actually being shifted to other places through these interagency agreements. They're happening at a number of agencies and departments right now. One of the most notable ones recently was that the Treasury Department is incrementally taking over the student aid portfolio for the Education Department. And this budget proposal proposes more of the same. They would seek to move the Education Department's career and technical education programs to the Labor Department. They are also another place where a lot of these programs are going. And so this is more of the Trump administration pursuing the dismantling of the Education Department, albeit through somewhat different means.
Well, that does raise the reorganization plans that you mentioned. Again, last year, Congress denied many of those. What plans are back on the table in this budget submission?
Another notable one here is over at the Department of Health and Human Services. There was this push to create this new Administration for a Healthy America, or AHA. This was championed by Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy. And what this would have done is that it would have merged programs from a bunch of different places, from the CDC, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, Health Resources and Services Administration, HRSA, and the HHS Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health. This never really got off the ground during the last budget cycle, but this is back on the agenda for this budget cycle. And it wouldn't be just moving these programs altogether. There would be sizable cuts. All things considered here, they're looking at about $5 billion in program cuts to all of those things that would move to AHA. And one other one to highlight here is one that's, I guess you could say, half in the works. And this is merging of the Wildland Fire Service operations at both Interior and the Agriculture Department. I say half because the Interior Department already did a reorganization of sorts. They blazed ahead with a merging of their programs, their wildland fire programs. They existed under different bureaus and offices, and they now report up to one single office that then reports up to the secretary. The overall goal here, though, was to have everything in USDA's Forest Service and everything in the Interior Department work under one roof. And that is yet to happen here. Congress actually said no thank you to that in the last budget cycle. They continue to separate them as separate budget items. And they said that, sorry, no, we're actually not going to endorse that. So Interior at this point is going it alone. But the budget request makes clear that the Trump administration really does want a single wildland fire agency, and that these resources from Interior and the Forest Service should be combined.
Jory, one of the agencies that has the biggest whiplash from administration to administration is the IRS. What does this budget have in store for them?
Yeah, so the IRS, more bad news for them at this point. This is being proposed, a $1.4 billion cut from existing levels, and they've already been on the decline. This is a pretty severe cut for an agency that really has been shrinking considerably under the Trump administration. They lost about 27% of their workforce last year. This is largely through voluntary separations and early retirements, fearing that there would be broader reductions in force that would be non-voluntary. Those never came to pass, but still the cuts are being felt. And as far as workforce cuts, those are going to be also pursued as well, in addition to what we've already seen. This would be a further 1.5% cut to taxpayer services. They already saw a 22% cut to staff last year, and this would be also about a 4% cut to IRS enforcement. This is all happening at a time when the IRS concedes that it doesn't have enough employees for taxpayer services, that so much so that they have moved people from their IT and human resources operations. They've put them on involuntary 120-day details to man the front lines, to assist in answering the calls, assist in the processing of incoming tax returns, to make sure everything can get done in an acceptable time frame.
One of the other agencies that's often under the microscope is the Veterans Administration. What are you seeing for them?
Right. So they would be getting a substantial increase in money. They would get a nearly $145 billion increase in discretionary funding. But what's notable here is that there's fewer employees on the job in its healthcare operations to do all of the work that's being proposed here. And these are pretty substantial cuts. We did see last year that the administration successfully got about 30,000 employees out of the organization. This is, again, through voluntary incentives and early retirements. Those are positions that they don't expect to fill. These are people that they let walk out the door. They are going to be strategically hiring for things like doctors, nurses, clinicians, those frontline medical personnel. They're going to make sure that those are still staffed up. But there are, of course, constraints on hiring overall because the VA says that in the past, under the Biden administration, that the VA was a little too trigger happy with the hiring, that they were hiring in such large numbers, but not really focusing on where those hires were. And so they want to make sure that they pretty much have the workforce that they have, but shift them to places where there's a more acute need.
Jory, are you seeing any through line in the budget document for these agencies that are going to experience smaller workforces yet larger workloads? How's the work going to get done? Is this an AI problem?
Well, there is some acknowledgement here in some level that they think AI will be some way to address the workforce gap, address the work that isn't being done by virtue of the fact that there are fewer employees on the job here. Of course, this did come up in the portion with the IRS, but the IRS also lost a lot of its IT talent, as we've discussed previously. I guess the one big through line here is that a lot of this does arrive on Congress's doorstep at the end of the day. They still control the power of the purse, and to the extent that Congress has been let in on administration reorg plans to date, this is now something that they have to be aware of. They have to know the ins and outs, the pros and cons, things that they're comfortable with and not comfortable with. And at the end of the day, they get to sign off on what the budget lines look like and what these agencies get to do.
That's Federal News Network's Jory Heckman. Jory, thanks for this breakdown.
Thanks, Terry.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com.